Fe, New Mexico. Surrounding our libraries are the landscapes of Pueblo, Apache, and Navajo communities, whose people continue to maintain vital connections to this land. As an institution privileged to steward Indigenous cultural materials and committed to uplifting Indigenous voices, we not only honor the ancestral stewards of this land, but celebrate their past, present, and future. Surrounding our library, Brian Young's novel, Healer of the Water Monster, is this year's NEA Big Read selection for our middle readers. And we have the honor to host Brian Young today, thanks to the Santa Fe New Mexican, Santa Fe Community Foundation, City of Santa Fe Arts and Culture Department, Friends of the Santa Fe Public Library, and National Endowment for the Arts, Arts Midwest for the 2022 Santa Fe Reads NEA Big Read. Author and filmmaker Brian Young is a graduate of both Yale University with a bachelor's in film studies and Columbia University with a master's in creative writing. An enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, he grew up on the Navajo Reservation and now currently lives in Brooklyn, New York. Healer of the Water Monster, Brian Young's powerful debut novel, tells of a seemingly ordinary Navajo boy who must save the life of a water monster and comes to realize he's a hero at heart. Please welcome author and filmmaker Brian Young.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is such a massive pleasure and honor to be standing here in front of you all. It was just a few years ago that I was actually living in Albuquerque, so doing an event for Santa Fe feels a little bit like I'm coming home, or at least back to the Southwest, where I really could use some green chili pizza or green chili cheeseburgers. I just miss green chili, and right now I know it's happening. It's the season for it, and I'm really hungry for it. All right, everyone. Well, without further ado, I am going to get started. Ayate, She'e Brian Young, Inishia, Tachi Inishlingo, Tatnesate Bashichin, Torchi Dashiche, A Ko Toda Konja E Dashanale. Hi, friends, family, and relations. My name is Brian Young. I am Red running into the Water Clan. I am born for the Tangle People Clan. My maternal grandfather's clan is Bitterwater, and my paternal grandfather's clan is Saltwater. And this is how for Navajos introduce ourselves. We all have 4 clans, 1 from our mother and the rest from our father figures. And the reason being, only females can pass down clans. But all kongi di a said son chishiket, sana shayaho, and this is where I'm from. If you imagine way off here to the right and little north is Santa Fe. You can see down right here at Albuquerque, and we travel along I-40 and this little star area right by the Arizona-New Mexico divide. That is where I grew up, in a small town called Fort Defiance. That's where I went to elementary, middle school, and my first year of high school. And a little further in this little area, just south or northwest, is Sawmill and Noslini, Arizona, and that's where my grandparents live. Akoangi DJ a Brooklyn Dikehashike, Ashdo Shamosa Kongi Holo. And today I currently live in Brooklyn, New York, with my 2 cats who are my partners in crime. They help me write. They usually will sit on my lap, forcing me to write my books. So you can thank them as well for helping get Healer of the Water Monster into your hands. And yes, I am the author. And it's my understanding that a few of you have read my book and chose it for your reading selection, and I'm so very honored. Thank you so much for all your attention. I hope that you related to Nathan and his journey on so many different levels, because Nathan is much like you. He has a lot of different facets to his personality. So for Sawmill, my mom would often send me up to my grandmother's place, maternal grandmother's place in Sawmill, Arizona. And this is a picture of it. And this is the Hogan where I would learn a lot of the traditional stories. So during the weekends and spring break, Thanksgiving break, all the breaks, my mom would send me up here to help my grandparents, because they had cattle way out here in Noslini, Arizona. Look at this. Does this look familiar for those of you who read the book? Very similar to how Nathan spent his summer. That is actually how I grew up. My grandparents would take me to Noslini, where we had cattle, cows, or begashi, and so I'd help them with the branding, the herding, the feeding, and making sure they had access to water. And every time I go back, I still try to help out because that was a huge part of my childhood. And I just love animals, and cows are so cool. If you ever take care of one when they're babies all the way to adults, you'll know what I mean. But yeah, look at this. This is Noslini, Arizona. And as you can see, there's not many houses. There's not many buildings. There's no infrastructure. There's no running water, very little electricity. So as a kid, what do you do to not be bored? There was no Switch, no Nintendo Switch. We had no smartphones back in the day. Even now, the smartphones don't get cell phone reception out here. So we had to actually talk to each other face to face. Wasn't that scary? I know. But as a kid, in those years, again, this is where I was introduced to all the traditional Diné or Navajo stories. And I carried those stories with me throughout my whole life. And some of you may be wondering, how do you become a published author? Maybe some of you have big dreams of writing your own stories, and I fully believe that your story is going to be as bright as the sun. But during my sophomore year in high school, I transferred from Window Rock, Arizona to the Hotchkiss School in Lakeville, Connecticut. And it is on the other side of the continent in upstate Connecticut. And this here is they call it a seal. And at the center of their seal is the Greek or the Roman goddess Minerva. And she is the goddess of wisdom, justice, law, and victory. And this is a picture of the main school building where I went to high school. And I was one of 2 indigenous students on the entire campus, going from the reservation all the way to the East Coast school. That was a huge wake-up call because on the res, I was surrounded by indigenous peers all over the place, but here I was one of 2. And I'm glad to have had that experience. It's very different from the Southwest. And if you look at the trees that are in this picture, their leaves were as big as my hand. And that was a huge shift in perspective for me. Just seeing how green it is. It's actual grass. It's not weeds on the ground. They had flowers all over the place. It was a very different experience. So after I graduated from the Hotchkiss School, I went down to New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale University is at. It is one of, I believe, a few Ivy League institutions. And this is a coat of arms, and all the Ivy Leagues have them. And on Yale's coat of arms is an open book with Hebrew words, and beneath it is Lux et Veritas, which translates to light and truth. And here is a picture of all the buildings down there, very different from the Pueblo style houses like in Santa Fe, right? The streets are all straight. They're not like rolling into each other. They're all very organized and thought out, I would say. But all these buildings are red bricks, and they have these slanted roofs. So at Yale, I studied film studies because it was something I always loved as a kid, was just the stories. And even though I didn't have electricity while out there, Sawmill, we did have electricity, and my cousins would leave their movies on VHS tape. I'm not sure if any of you know what that is, but we would watch them, and I would watch them, and always see these pictures of all these places. I always wanted to go there. So when I chose my undergraduate degree, I chose film studies because it was close to my heart, and I wanted to work in the film industry as a director and a writer, and I still am, and I still do. At Yale, I was no longer the only indigenous student there. Here is a picture of 2 other students while I was there at ANA, or the Association of Native Americans at Yale. And every Friday, we make fry bread and maintain our cultural roots. And after I graduated from Yale in 2010, that's when I moved to Albuquerque. And back then, do you remember when all those MCU movies were just beginning, like the first Iron Man, the first Thor? That's when they were all filming in New Mexico. And it made sense for me to work and live there, as Albuquerque is very close to my reservation, to where I grew up, and the film industry then was booming. But I found out very quickly that the movie industry still treated Native Americans as background or scenery, and I didn't like the few roles that were available. They were all stereotypes, and that's a very, very important word to understand. As an actor, I didn't want to play stereotypes. So I started writing my own movies and filming them, and it was a struggle. It was really hard because back then, movie producers did not want to support filmmakers, Native filmmakers. And it was around that time that I had a dream that would eventually become Healer of the Water Monster. And for those of you that read it, it's the chapter in Nitchitosa, when Nathan runs through a cornfield and out into the desert, and he sings with the little water monster, and it starts to rain. And I was so frustrated working in the movie industry in Albuquerque, so that's when I decided to pivot into writing a book. And so for 3 years, while I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I wrote the book, and I tried to find a literary agent. And it, again, like with all things that are worthwhile, it was a very, very difficult thing to do. So that's when I decided to go back to school. And I decided to go into the creative writing program, the master's program at Columbia University in New York City. And here is their coat of arms. And as you can see on that little ribbon at the very bottom, right here, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but there it is. The Latin reads, in lumine tuo vidimus lumen, which roughly translates to, in thy light shall we see light. So all these coat of arms are referencing light. I wonder what that's about, right? And I spent a great deal of my time in the libraries because I love libraries. Another thing that would help pass the time at Noslini was my mom would take me to the Gallup library, and I would get like 10, 15 books, max out my account and max out my mom's account, and then while I was at my grandparents' place, just read. And often my mom would drop me off at libraries. So libraries are very much my first babysitter. And I always love a good library. And in this specific library, the Butler Library at Columbia University, was where I did all my homework. And I rewrote my book, Healer of the Water Monster, for probably the 5th, maybe even the 6th time. 6 times. That's how many times I had to rewrite Healer of the Water Monster to get it to where it is currently at. But in addition to studying in New York City, I really wanted to experience what is it like to live in this big city. And here's me running eastward on the Brooklyn Bridge. And for Navajos, you're supposed to wake up very early and run eastward towards the rising sun for blessings. And even out here in New York City, I am maintaining my cultural practices, my traditional knowledges that I had grown up with. And I also love video games, so I made a special trip to visit the Nintendo store in Rockefeller Plaza. And there's a lot of wonderful little small stores like this all over the place. So after I finished the 6th, maybe 5th revision, that's when I signed on with my literary agent. And this is him right here, Dan Mandel, and we have huge plans for my professional career as an author. And after you get a literary agent is when you go into submission to publishing houses. And my agent and I, we did just that. And we were very fortunate to find Heart Drum, which is an imprint of HarperCollins. And Heart Drum focuses exclusively on Indigenous writers, Indigenous authors. And if you don't know what imprint is, think of like a big tree, okay? So HarperCollins is this big tree, and the branches, they have many different branches that devote themselves to different voices, such as Latinx, such as African American, LGBTQ+, any type of division or genre there is an imprint for that, so that writers that write those books that are of those identities can have the care and attention that they deserve. And think of HarperCollins as like a movie studio, like Fox or Disney. They are the big kahunas in the publishing industry. And there were so many things that I wanted to write about in Healer of the Water Monster, and I hope you gain a lot of different things. And I want to read with you really quickly one of the more important scenes I feel in Healer of the Water Monster. There's so many, and it was so difficult for me to choose, but I wanted to read to you when Nathan talks with Devin about meeting the holy being, the water monster. So at this point in the book, if you haven't read it, Nathan is spending time with his paternal grandmother in Church Rock, New Mexico, just about an hour northwest away from Galva. And just like the picture you saw, Nazlini, there's no running water, there's no electricity, so he's not very happy being there. And he comes across a water monster. In Navajo mythology, water monsters are in the third world, and they, in this book, protect sources of water. And this particular water monster has been sick for 30 years, causing a drought in the area for 30 years. So Nathan gets lost in the desert, and he asks the water monster to help bring him out of the desert. And the water monster says, yeah, I'll do that, but you're going to have to heal me. So that way we can end this 30-year drought. And we are going to start right now with right here at the very bottom of page 74. So we're right in this thicket of things. Now, Nathan, Devin said, turning to him, tell me more of this holy being that told you about the enemy way ceremony. Well, last night I met a water monster, and he told me to tell Nolly anyway, and long story short, here I am. Nathan squirmed, feeling a little shy, and he wasn't entirely comfortable talking with an adult that he had just met about, talking with an adult he had just met about almost dying in the desert and being saved by a holy being. Devin stared at him for a few moments, and it was very hard to read his expression, but he nodded. You are very lucky. It's not every day holy beings present themselves to humans, especially in this day and age. Devin believed him, and Nathan relaxed a little. You don't think it's a fantasy? Don't call your culture a fantasy, Nolly firmly said. Sorry. Do you think meeting a holy being is, an everyday thing? When I was your age, Devin started, maybe a little bit younger, I saw a being, same shape as you and me. Well, maybe more my shape now. Taller, grown. But its skin was a glowing rainbow. Not it was a rainbow being. And it told me that I was going to become a Hatashi, a medicine man, after I went through many hardships. And well, long story short, here I am. Nathan chuckled when Devin repeated his words. With both Nolly and Devin easily accepting holy beings as real, Nathan was ready to get down to business. The water monster is sick. He gets dizzy spells and nausea. Is there anything you can think of that can affect water monsters? Sick? You didn't mention that, Nolly said. Sorry, I forgot to mention it, Nathan said. He squeezed his thumb tightly and felt his forehead grow hot from hiding information from Nolly. Well, Devin said, There are 4 forms of sickness: emotional, spiritual, internal physical, and external physical. Figuring out the type of sickness is a good start. When I start working with new patients, I look at the symptoms and I try to diagnose them. But be very careful to make sure that you yourself don't get sick from what's affecting them. Healing is a delicate process. I'm not able to think of anything particular that might directly affect a water monster, or any holy being for that matter. Like their ways affect us, our ways affect them. Thank you, sir, Nathan said. Sir, Devin said. Devin's your uncle by clan, Nellie said. Nathan struggled to think of a Navajo word for paternal uncle. Unsure, he guessed Shiyasha. Oh, shit, Devin said. Do you have any other questions for me? Nathan thought long and hard. No, I've asked all I wanted. Is there anything I can do or offer? Devin said. Please let me know. I've healed many people, but never a water monster. Molly stood up and dusted her jeans off. I'll talk with Jet and convince him. We'll have a diagnosis meeting soon. Yo, Nathan, help me with this, Uncle Jet said later that afternoon. Nathan walked inside the hogan and helped Uncle Jet carry a large, heavy mattress outside. Nathan held on with all his strength, and when he stepped outside, the broiling sun dug into the back of his neck. Here, lean it against the wall. Got it, Uncle Jet. All right, just hit the mattress with his baseball bat to dust it off, sweep the floor inside, and bing, bada, boom, I got my own darn room, Uncle Jet said, swaying his upper body from side to side, and he was massaging his lower back with his knuckles. Once we're done, I'll check out the cornfield and see about fixing some of those posts. Okay, Nathan said. Uncle Jet went back into the hogan while Nathan stared at the cornfield. He realized that he had to re-sow, and after the excitement of getting lost, running into the water monster, and seeing Devin, Nathan had completely forgotten about the horned toad that stole his seeds and very rudely called him fat. Fixing the fence wasn't going to stop it. Heads up, buddy, Uncle Jet said from inside the hogan, and he tossed out a large trash bag. It slammed into Nathan's stomach and pushed him back, knocking both the wind out of his lungs and his glasses to the ground. Gotta pay attention, kid. If you're in the field, that could have been fire from the enemy, Uncle Jet said. He puffed his chest and widened his shoulders. Nathan searched the blurry ground for his glasses, and all the plants and rocks blended together like a blobby shape. Suddenly, he felt a very painful sting on possibly billions of little melds in his palms. Whatever it was sucked its teeth deeper and deeper into his flesh. An image of the spider he had seen yesterday flashed into his mind. Uncle Jet, help! His breathing became loud and fast. A rush of cold sweat flowed over his entire body. Was this thing poisonous? Was the poison rushing into his vein? Would they have to take him to the hospital? What's wrong, Nathan? What? Dude, it's only a jumping cactus. What do I do? Come on, man, don't be such a little sissy. Uncle Jet yanked the tiny cactus out of his palm. The sharp jolts of pain remained, and Nathan sniffled. His eyes cooled with tears. Stop crying, man, Uncle Jet said. But it hurts, Nathan said. And Uncle Jet handed Nathan his glasses. All right, dude, man up. Some little cactus gonna make you cry? Then you're gonna be a little sissy your entire life. When you're getting shot at, that's when you have a reason to cry. When Nathan wasn't able to stop sobbing, Uncle Jet sighed. Here's my trick. Don't think about it. Keep moving. He patted Nathan's back and went back into the hogan, leaving Nathan to suffer through the residual pangs of pain. Nathan did everything in his power to not think about the words stinging and sharp. He wanted to touch something cool and smooth, and then he remembered that he still had the turquoise necklace in his pocket. He pulled it out and pressed its bumpy, cold exterior to the place that hurt. Even if he still didn't fully understand how it worked, it soothed him. Nathan grabbed one of the black trash bags Jet had thrown outside and tried to lift it up, and the plastic tore open. A few elaborate hand-woven rugs fell onto the desert. Some had very intricate and detailed geometrical shapes. One had a depiction of what looked like Nellie's home, with a cornfield, plants, sheep, and cows, and even a family on it. Another rug caught Nathan's attention. It had a depiction of holy beings holding bundles in their hands, and a rainbow holy being bordered its edges. All right, so I'm going to stop right there because I want to talk a little bit about the themes of the book. Here we go, back to presentation. Boom. All right, so throughout the entire book, and even in the small little passage that I read for you, family is a unifying theme. And it is one of four that repeatedly bring itself up. Family being the most important, and we also have healing, we also have empathy, and a concept called two worlds that I want to quickly talk to you about. Family. Nathan addresses the holy beings as his grandparents, so they are establishing a family relationship. And if you notice in that passage I just read with Devin, the medicine man, he is Nathan's clan uncle, and he calls him uncle. And Devin also calls him my son in Navajo, Shiyit. That's what that means, my son. Nathan's nuclear family, those of you who read it, you get that reference. His nuclear family, in the sense of him, his mom, and his dad, has been broken, and he's trying to figure out that new family dynamics with his dad going with his girlfriend, his dad's new girlfriend, to Las Vegas. Even the cover of the book itself shows the close relationship between Nathan and his grandma, Nolly. So family is a huge, huge, huge theme and topic that constantly brings itself up. And healing, it's a part of the title of the book. So that's also very important. When Nathan asks Devin for help, he says that there are four things that he looks for when trying to help someone heal. Are they spiritual, emotional, physical, internal, physical, external? And all of these characters have elements of all these elements, have elements of all these ailments. But if I were to kind of roughly sum everything up, Uncle Jet represents emotional healing, and Nolly is spiritual healing. Pond is physical internal because he's sick from the inside from the poisoning. And physical external is the land itself. It is currently in a drought, and everything that's happening around them is physical. It happens around them in their outside. Nathan himself has room to grow in all these elements, and that is why he is the healing element for everything around him, all the characters and even the land. And I chose empathy for one of the themes because when I was writing Heal with Water Monster, I kept asking myself, why is Nathan so special? What is his superpower? And for me, his superpower is caring for others. That's what sees him through every trial. That's where he gets a lot of his bravery and his courage, is because he's helping others. He never stops believing in Uncle Jet, even when Uncle Jet goes through a drinking binge. He loves and cares for Nolly, and through their interactions, Nathan grows to love and care for Pond as one of his best friends. And for young boys, we are often expected to be stoic and strong, and I'm here to tell you that caring for others is a sign of strength as well. And this is, I think, one of the bigger themes that I kept constantly coming back to was this idea of two worlds. As an Indigenous person and a Navajo person, this is a very common concept. A lot of Indigenous people live in the Western modern world, but we also live in the traditional world of our ancestors. And often we are told that our traditions are going extinct as we become more and more assimilated and integrated into mainstream culture. And I wanted to write against that. I think that is a lot of baloney, because we exist in both worlds successfully. Native people exist in both worlds, traditional and modern, successfully. And Nathan reflects that. He is the balance of both those worlds, traditional and modern. He can play video games and attend ceremonies. He can use his smartphone to call his friends, but he can also speak with holy beings in Navajo. And think of how many other ways this two worlds concept kind of manifests in the story. There's day and night. During the day, Nathan is often helping Uncle Jet. During the night, he's often helping Pond. There's traditional and modern, like I was talking to you about, how Nathan interacts with the holy beings during the night, and then during the day, he's interacting with all his family members and even texting his dad. There's even cleaning water versus drinking water, how those two cycles are to utilize all the moisture as efficiently as possible. There's reservation life and Gallup, or even reservation and Santa Fe. There's science and spirituality, and in that, therapy and ceremony. And a lot of times we're told that these are two opposing forces, that they do not work together, like oil and water. But they aren't. They can coexist, and within Nathan, they do. My favorite image of the entire book is towards the end. So no spoilers, but maybe a little spoilers. Nathan buries an egg in the middle of the cornfield. And where exactly? In between what? In between the square and the spiral. And what do those shapes represent in the book? They represent traditional and modern for his science experiments. Nathan labels them the traditional square, or the modern square, and the traditional spiral. And that's where he chooses to bury that egg that will one day hatch. Even Devin says to Nolly earlier in the scene that I just read, that in order for Uncle Jet to fully heal, he needs both the enemy way ceremony as well as therapy, because Uncle Jet walks in both Navajo and mainstream worlds. And with that, I want to hear what you guys think. What are some things that you picked up on? Because I'm sure there are so many things that you notice that I may have overlooked. And that's why I am opening up to listen from you all. Thank you for paying attention to me. All right.
Okay, thank you, Brian. You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can.
All right. So one of our first questions we have from our students here is, how long did it take you to write Healer of the Water Monster? Which I think you said, well, you've said a few rewrites, but how many years was that?
I can tell you 7 years, everyone. It took me 7 years to write Healer of the Water Monster. The first time that I got the dream, I wrote the first draft, and I kept writing. And then that's about when I went to get my master's degree in creative writing. That was another 3 years. And then 1 more year of working with my editor. So 7 years, that's how long it took me to get from dream to book. How old were you all 7 years ago?
They're 3 years old.
Goodness, babies.
How do you manage to continue to live in two worlds? Continue to live in, you live in very modern Brooklyn, but do you, is it easy to stay in your traditional indigenous Navajo world as well?
Yes, it's an effort, but one of the beautiful things about New York City is that it is a melting pot. And you may encounter this word in high school, but melting pot means that there are just so many different cultures coexisting together. We have Korean town, Chinatown, Little Italy, Little Barcelona. So there are all these different identities coexisting together, and I am happy to be one of a few Navajos. And one of the ways I still maintain my connection to my culture is I try to be physically active in the mornings. That picture I showed of you with me on the Brooklyn Bridge was me maintaining my cultural roots. But in addition to that, I'm also learning Navajo. It's a very, very hard language. But I am putting that effort forward, and I encourage you all too to learn another language. So this is Tuonanantizi, which means Tuba City.
Thank you.
Yeah.
On that note, there is a question about why you decided to include a glossary in your book.
You know, I actually didn't want to provide a glossary initially. I wanted the Navajo to exist on its own because that was my experience growing up on the reservation. I wasn't sat down and taught Navajo. And a lot of times Navajo was kind of like the adult language that I myself couldn't access or understand. So a lot of important conversations were held in Navajo, and I felt excluded from those conversations. And initially, I didn't want to provide the glossary or the translations because I wanted you all to feel how that felt growing up with this Navajo language being spoken and you have no idea how to access to. But my editor, she encouraged me to think about you guys. And if there was a way to help introduce Navajo to you all through this book and having the translations available, that's when I said, okay, I will happily provide the translations because this may be your first time seeing Navajo and appreciating it as a living language. And to me, that's more important than reflecting my experiences growing up on the reservation.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I definitely flipped to the glossary a lot throughout the reading, so it's helpful for me. I enjoyed having that included. I really appreciate you including that. This is an interesting question. I would like to know too. Did you have experiences like Nathan growing up? Did you yourself ever meet a holy being?
I am not allowed to say.
Okay.
But the way I grew up and was exposed to the stories, we were always told they were real. So it wasn't too hard to imagine that these holy beings had physical manifestations that could be seen by kids. Because when my grandma would tell me, like, you know, the story of Changing Woman, she'd point to a mountain way off in the distance and say, that's where the holy beings found her when she was a baby. On top of that mountain, she was crying, and the holy beings picked her up and they cared for her. Or they point to like a canyon down there and they'd say, that's where Spider Woman lives. She's the one that taught us how to, you know, make clothes for ourselves. So these stories that I grew up with always had that element of realism to me. And so when writing the book, it wasn't too hard to push that feeling that these stories are real just a little bit further. But a lot of Nathan's experiences with his weight were from my experiences being a little chubby as a kid and growing up with alcoholism in the family. Those experiences were informed by my childhood.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Brian Young.
You are very welcome.
Since you are a filmmaker and screenwriter, do you plan to make Healer of the Water Monster a movie or a television show?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. This is actually why I wrote the book. If you remember me talking about living in Albuquerque and having to fight against stereotypes, that was also during the time when all these book adaptations were happening in the film world. There was Harry Potter, there was the Hunger Games, there was the Divergent series. So all these books were being made into movies. Nowadays, it's streaming services. There are tons of books being translated to limited series on the streaming services. And that has always been my goal, because when I first wrote Healer of the Water Monster, it was a movie script. But then those frustrations working as an Indigenous person in the film industry told me to write it as a book first, and then demonstrate that there is a market for these voices, that there are people who are interested in the story, and then make it into a movie. So that is still my long-term goal, and I hope that if and when it does happen, you will all watch it, because I had a blast imagining all these wonderful visual elements, and I would love for you to see them all represented on the big screen. And even my agent, one of the reasons I signed on with him is because he and I have the same goal of making this into a series. I think at this point, a series would be the best format for it. So long story short, yes, I have full intentions of turning this into a film experience.
That's awesome. We can't wait.
Me too.
On that same note, there is a question about what do you think about seeing more Indigenous representation in TV and movies? And do you like representation you have seen in TV series, such as the Reservation Dogs?
I absolutely adore Reservation Dogs. It might be a little older for some of you, but I absolutely adore what they're doing with Reservation Dogs and what they have been able to do with Rutherford Falls. I think the success of those shows definitely demonstrates that those initial movie producers that I pitched to 10 years ago were wrong. That there is a market for us, that there are people wanting to watch and read our stories. And I think it's wonderful that so many different stories from Indigenous people are being told. Have you all seen Prey? Again, that's an older viewership, but it's another amazing, amazing movie. I completely watched it in Comanche several times. It's a very exciting time to be an Indigenous person working in the storytelling community. So yes, I'm very excited for what's happening with Indigenous filmmaking.
Awesome. Yeah, Prey was so cool. We have a brave student ready to ask their question on their own. So go ahead.
So did you want your show or movie to be one with cartoons or a realistic one, like in person?
I want to blend both. There is the style of filmmaking that is called interpolate rotoscope, and it's a very, very rarely used element where you take a film such as what you're seeing right now, but then you trace over it and then you turn it into animation, and you can do that with computers, and then you can add an animated element to that. So you still have that realism of an actor's face, but you can also integrate it with animated elements. So that would be my ideal goal. I wouldn't mind doing completely animated or completely realistic with CGI. But these things take a lot of money. It's very expensive. But I would love, love, love to see it done in interpolate rotoscope.
Thank you. Here's another brave student.
Do you
Thank
have
you.
an end making a book about a female hero?
Yes. And I actually just finished the second book, Heroes of the Water Monster, and it's going to be published in May 23rd, 2023. So the follow-up is coming out in 6 months, so be on the lookout for that. And I am working with my editor on the third Water Monster book, and that one I do want a young girl to be the hero. I do want a young girl to be the one called into an adventure. So I'm laying the foundations right now, and we'll see. Yeah, I would love to see a young girl take the reins and be the hero.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
How would you feel if you were in your own movie?
I'd feel weird. I feel scared. Yeah, I've never given that too much thought. I've always thought of me being the director. Yeah, I'd be nervous. How would you feel?
I would feel nervous too.
But I bet it would also be exciting too.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
Hi, Mr. Young. My name is Brenda Dominguez. I'm a teacher here in Santa Fe, and we haven't read your book yet, but as a teacher of students who are Dene and who are not Dene, I really thank you for this, and the kids can't wait to get started on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for forcing them to read my book.
What books inspired you as a kid?
Goosebumps.
Yeah.
That was a gut reaction there. Goosebumps. I love horror stories, and Goosebumps were my bread and butter. I would constantly reread them, and they were a huge source of motivation to keep writing. So if you love Goosebumps, they are my inspiration.
I love to hear that. As a librarian, I struggled reading as a kid, and Goosebumps and Archie comics is how I learned to read. So go Goosebumps.
Yeah, R.L. Stein, I really want to meet him.
Yes. Well, thank you a million times, Brian Young. This was such a wonderful visit. And thank you
for
to all
having me.
the students for joining us and asking such thoughtful questions. Yeah, I hope you all have a beautiful weekend. Many thanks to all the NEA Big Read sponsors to help make today's program possible. Friends of the Library, Santa Fe New Mexican, Santa Fe Community Foundation, City of Santa Fe Arts and Culture, and of course our National Endowment for the Arts Midwest grant for the Big Read. We hope that you'll all join us for more of our Big Read programs, including author Tommy Orange's event on November 5th. Yeah. And I hope you very much enjoyed this program today as much as I did. Thank you so much, Brian Young. You're our hero of the Water Monster.
Oh my gosh. Thank you all. Thank you.
Have a beautiful week in Santa Fe.
Yes. And read.